Let's welcome to the show Parents Defunding Education President and co-founder Nicole Neily. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
With the midterms looming, obviously this is a big issue, right? There are a lot of issues on the plate, but post-COVID, we had the impression that we would see these kinds of dips in the learning capabilities of our children. Now the data is starting to, essentially confirm what our biggest fears were. Your thoughts on how education will play in parents' voting patterns across this country? Many are very upset by what's happened here, how the teachers' unions played politics, how the Democrats, blue states, kept schools closed longer than they should, and we are going to have to pay the price for that.
Absolutely. Now, with schools back across the country back in session, I think it's really hitting home the amount of learning loss that has taken place. And, these scores really just confirm what parents have known for 2 years. That keeping schools closed was a disaster not only for children's mental health, but for their academic achievement. And the irony that the same people who scream equity from the rooftops are the ones that put in place these policies that obviously have impacted the most vulnerable students is disgusting. And for them to try and rewrite history and say, this wasn't our fault. I mean, we remember, parents remember who was fighting tooth and nail to keep these schools closed.
Well, it's amazing because now they're also saying all the spending wasn't their fault. Nothing is the Democrats' fault. It all was President Trump's fault, even though 2020 was the worst of it, the thick of the pandemic. So the PPP spending, some of the closures that we saw, it was one thing at that time before we had vaccines, but then you had vaccines and the teachers' unions still wanted to keep the schools closed. They still wanted to mask our children. There's also some evidence that red states like Florida kept the doors open a little bit more, and that the kids are doing better there than they are, for example, in New York and in California.
It's not surprising. I mean, any adult that has struggled through a Zoom conference call knows exactly the hell it is to put these children on for 7 hours a day for 9 months out of the school year. It's no wonder that these children suffered. And again, let's remember what these teachers' unions said. The Chicago Teachers Union tweeted, "The push to reopen schools is rooted in racism, sexism, and misogyny." These are the kinds of things we were told. We were shamed for wanting our children back in school to learn. And what has happened? Our children are in absolute free fall right now.
I just have a minute left with you, but I want to ask about some of the funding that was set aside during the COVID period. There's evidence that only 44% of the money was actually spent to improve schools. And people are wondering, well, what about the rest of the money? Where did it go? Why isn't it being used to help teachers get our kids back up to speed? Maybe it's extra programs after school to bring more teachers in, whatever.
It's a great question. Show me the money. I mean, where we know that the money has gone to is it went to pet projects like social emotional learning, which is the Trojan horse for critical race theory, to put all these kinds of, identity politics into our classrooms. Again, not keeping children from focusing on the basics. Our children are suffering because the teachers' unions wanted their money in their pockets.
Yeah, and I can assure you in China, they are not worried about critical race theory, and they have not closed their schools. The kids are still pressing forward because China wants to eat our lunch. Nicole Neily, thank you. Good to see you.